Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Regency Society online talks. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we have David Robson, who again probably needs no introduction, but is a Regency Society member and former vice chair. And he is going to talk to us tonight about the Denman dynasty. This is the first of two talks, and the title will be A Denman Century, the work of Samuel, John-Leopold and John-Bluett Denman. And tonight's first talk will introduce the Denmans and focus on their public buildings in Brighton and their pubs and churches. I'm now going to hand over to David Sears, a Regency Society member, who will introduce David Robson. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, well, you have already used pretty well all the words I was going to.
Sorry, David.
And I was also going to say how nice it was to see everybody, but I can't see everybody because you've all vanished. So I'm like every Zoom presenter, talking into deadly silence and not knowing even who's out there. But welcome to this evening. You all know David better than I probably, but I have spent some time with him on this project, which of course was interrupted by COVID. The plan was to go around the various locations and take photographs. That's become impossible. I have heard some of his comments during the lockdown last year. We could go walking together, and he's amazing for me to give a brief lecture, very entertaining, while walking fast uphill on the Sussex Downs. So I've learned a lot from him. And I think this is part of what the Regency Society does so well, teaching us how to look at buildings and understand what we're seeing. So I think we can now get ready for what I'm sure will be a fast and exciting tour of the hospitals, cemeteries, clubs, pubs and churches, which have been designed or modified by the Denman family. And I'm also told that you can see many of these from the top of a #1 Brighton bus. So that could be our next tour for the Regency Society. David, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, David. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Fine. Okay. So in this first talk, I'd like to share some background details on the three Denmans and their practice, and show a few of their significant public buildings in Brighton before discussing their pub and church designs in some detail. In my second talk, I'll describe their designs for different types of housing and show some of their major buildings from further afield. My aim with both talks is to pose the following questions. Why has this unique family of three architects not received greater recognition, particularly in Brighton and across Sussex, where they worked and built? Why has the Regency Society not taken up the cause of an architect who was one of its founders and served as its chair and president? And why, when we write about architecture in this country, why is the word provincial regarded as pejorative? Three generations of Denmans ran a practice in Brighton between 1876 and 1982. Samuel Denman, John-Leopold Denman, John-Bluett Denman. Between them, I estimate that they designed and built over 500 buildings in Brighton, across Sussex and beyond. I've so far managed to photograph about 200 of them. I'm not going to attempt to show you all of them tonight, don't worry. But I would like to show you a cross-section of their work and hopefully convince you of their significance. Samuel Denman was born in Brighton in 1855, the son of John Hubbard Denman, a plasterer, jobbing builder, who sometimes described himself as an architect. Of course, anyone could do that at that time. The title architect was not protected until 1931. Samuel was articled for a short period during the early 1870s to a firm of architects in Sheffield, and seems to have set himself up as a surveyor and architect in Brighton in about 1876. He was active in the housing boom that occurred in and around Brighton during the decades leading up to World War I, and seems to have operated as an architect, a surveyor, and sometimes as a developer. In 1882, he bought number 26 Queen's Road, Brighton, to house his office, and lived with his family on the upper floors for a few years. Over the next 50 years, he owned and lived in a number of different properties across Sussex, including a house that he built after 1886, on the Downs, above Fulking. This was named Fulking Grange, though it came to be known locally as Denman's Folly. He sold it to Brighton Corporation in 1901, and it was used as an isolation hospital until 1940, when it was requisitioned by the army and used as an artillery target. His son, John-Leopold, the second Denman, was born in 1882 and was educated at Brighton and Hove Grammar School. Having been initially articled to his father, he worked with London architects Joseph and Smitham between 1902 and 1908, and studied part-time at the Central Schools and the Architectural Association, becoming an associate of the RIBA in 1909. He was very much influenced by Lutyens and obtained a place in Lutyens' office in 1908, but his father persuaded him to come back to Brighton and join the family firm. He served in the Royal Engineers during World War I, and after suffering from a serious bout of pneumonia, was advised to leave Brighton, and he established a home in Hurstpierpoint. In 1920, he became a partner in his father's practice. As an architect, he was particularly prolific during the 2 decades between the wars, but he also took an active part in professional and public life. He was the leading lecturer in architecture at the Brighton School of Art from 1909 to 1927, and after World War II was a prominent member of the Regency Society. He became honorary treasurer and vice president of the RIBA. The third Denman, John-Bluett, was born in 1914, studied during the 1930s at the Bartlett under Richardson and Corfiata. He served during the war in the Far East and was a Japanese prisoner of war on Java from 1942 to 1945. And this experience cast something of a shadow on the rest of his life, though he worked in partnership with his father until 1975, and finally closed the office in 1982. Now, this chart, I hope you can fathom it out, but I've tried to show the makings of the what I call the Denman Century. So there is a sort of timeline across the top, and I mark in yellow World War I and World War II because they had quite an impact on the lives of the Denmans. And then you have the 3 bars of the lives, Samuel, John-Leopold, and John-Bluett. And the red crosses denote the span of their working life. And then I bring those red crosses down to the bottom just to give you the history of the practice and its different names. So there was Samuel Denman practicing alone. And then there was Denman with a man called Matthews. And then Denman and Son, John-Leopold Denman, then Denman and Son again, this time John-Leopold and John-Bluett, and then finally John-Bluett practicing alone. Now, this is a lecture to the Regency Society. So I wanted to say something about the Denmans' connection to the Regency Society. John-Leopold, in fact, tried to start a civic society in Brighton at the end of the 1920s with his friend Louis Jeanette, but this didn't take off. However, after World War II, he was one of the founders of the Regency Society. And he was involved with the Regency Society for 31 years, until in fact the year before his death. And during that time, he was first a trustee, then vice chair, and chair, and then president. And that picture on the left shows him as chair at the 25th anniversary dinner with his wife at his side. And the drawing that I've shown there gives an indication of the sorts of things that the Regency Society used to get up to. The council was proposing to build surface car parking on Regency Square, and the Regency Society opposed this strongly, and the then chair, John-Leopold Denman, went and designed a complete proposal in great detail for an underground car park, stepped in 3 levels down the square, and was then landscaped. And of course, this is in fact the basis of what the council actually produced. So now I'd like to show you examples of their work, starting with Samuel Denman. And most of Samuel Denman's work was to do with housing, church repair, and pubs, but he did do a number of major public buildings. And this is Lewes Town Hall from 1893. And I hope you can see the arrow. The front of the town hall, you can see it at the bottom of this picture. And this had been the Star Inn, which was a very old building that had been remodeled and refronted in the 18th century as a Georgian building. And then in the mid-19th century, I.K. Brunel added the Corn Exchange at the back. And then Denman was given the job of refronting the town hall and adding assembly rooms on Fisher Street. And you can see that. There's the front of the town hall. And this is the front. And in fact, all of the windows correspond to the Georgian windows that were there. But you can see that Denman refronted in this fairly florid red brick Queen Anne style. It's quite muscular, I think you could say. But certainly Pevsner didn't like it, and one can accept that it actually probably doesn't fit very comfortably into Lewes. But there's a view of the front door and the inside. And this shows the elevation on the side, which is a lot more successful in terms of Lewes. There is the main assembly room, which is a very elegant room. And below is Brunel's Corn Exchange. And then in similar style, at more or less the same time, he created the Hove Club, again in a sort of Queen Anne Jacobean style. It has these very elaborate chimneys with flues. You can see how the flues divide around the windows. The fireplace is actually ingeniously inserted below the windows. And these are views of the interior. Quite a few of the details of the interior have survived, but unfortunately, the upper floors are now have been taken by, I think it's a firm of solicitors. For a time, it was a casino. And the staircase is now cut off from the club. This was, in fact, John-Leopold's very first commission, independent commission, when he returned from London to work with his father. And he was asked to remodel the Lady Chapel of St. Nicholas in Brighton. And so the paneling and the reredos behind the altar are the work of John-Leopold Denman. So this was his first bit of church architecture. Now, the John-Leopold and Samuel were Freemasons, and one of their first large projects together was the creation of a Freemason Centre in Queen's Road, Brighton. And this aerial photograph will help you to understand what's going on here. Originally, this central building, which was, I hope I'm allowed to say this, it was designed by Eamon Henry Wilds, and it was donated to the Freemasons, and the Freemasons then acquired the properties to the south. But at that time, Samuel Denman owned number 26, which was here, and he sold it to the Freemasons and moved into 27. And then he and his son got the job of creating the Freemason Centre, which is behind. And this large roof is the temple, and below it are the assembly rooms. And that just shows the buildings in the streetscape. And this shows just three main buildings. This is the Damon Henry Wiles building, which is now more or less the Freemasons Club. And the middle picture shows where number 26 had been located. This is where Samuel had his office, and they used to live above the office. And this is where John-Leopold grew up. And it was demolished so that they could create a ceremonial entrance and a grand staircase to serve the assembly room and the temple. And this is number 27, which Samuel Denman then bought. And this was their office until the office finally closed in 1982. So these are a series of pictures showing the ceremonial entrance and the staircase, which is a very grand affair that rises in one flight to the first floor level, which is where you have access to the assembly rooms. I haven't shown the assembly room because they're now in a bit of a mess. But then above the first floor, the staircase becomes a dogleg around a light well. It's a very elegant staircase. And there are these hanging lights, which have a slightly sort of Viennese feel to them. And above them is this, roof light, which lights the space. And then at the very top, you come to the temple, which is quite a remarkable affair. Traditionally, a Freemason's temple does not have any windows, so it's an unwindowed space, and it has this checkerboard pattern, which is prescribed. And then there are these ceremonial seats on the four axes. And that drawing that I'm showing on the top right is a section, and it shows the top level, which is the temple, and then the assembly rooms below. And below that is really a basement in the hillside. And all of the fittings, all of this woodwork, the paneling was all designed by John-Leopold. The ceiling light shows the signs of the zodiac. And these are just details. The drawing on the left is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It shows the Denman sketch for the main chair. There it is. There's a detail of it. And then the two pictures on the right just show this slightly sort of neoclassical Art Deco that characterizes much of the interior. And in a similar vein, in a way, soon after, in 1928, the Denmans were commissioned to build these pylons, and they are in a way inspired, I suppose, by Lutyens' cenotaph, but they are triangular in plan, and they mark the two sides of what was then the A23. Though now with the dual carriageway, one of them sits uncomfortably in the middle. And the decoration was designed, we think, by Louis Jeanette, and this is an early example of Denman's collaborations with Louis Jeanette, the painter, and with Joseph Cribb, the sculptor and letter cutter. And it may be that Cribb in fact did cut the lettering, but I have no proof of that. Jeanette was one of the Ditchling group of artists, and he and Denman both taught in the Brighton School of Art. He probably introduced Denman to Cribb. Cribb had been Eric Gill's pupil and later took over Gill's studio in Ditchling. I'm going to have more to say about these two collaborators in my second talk. This is a grade 2 listed building. It obviously belongs to the council and is very badly looked after, overgrown, and is not really in the best of condition now, which is rather sad. The pylons were opened by the future King George VI and the woman who we came to know later as the Queen Mother. And at the same time, Harry Carden, who'd been involved, the pylons were there to demark the new boundary of Brighton, which had resulted from the acquisition of land by Carden. And Carden also got the Denmans to design this bench on the dike. And I think this is one of the first little Denman jokes that I'll introduce you to, because I'm pretty sure that he cited this very deliberately and accurately to point exactly along the ridge of the Downs to the site of the house that his father had built, Denman's Folly, which by then had been demolished, or at least it was in ruins. And so that faced Denman's Folly. During this period, Denman was commissioned to do a number of banks around Sussex in such places as Stenning, Burgess Hill, Preston Circus. And this is his design for the Barclays in Hurstpierpoint. You see it fits very politely into the streetscape. You also see the quality of John-Leopold's drawing. So this drawing, this perspective drawing, is a very, very accurate representation of the bank building that was eventually built. And that's still there in pretty good condition and fits, as I say, very politely into Hurstpierpoint Street. And then soon after, in 1928, comes the commission to build the Citizens Building Society building. Excuse me. And this is in this polite near Georgian, but we see that it's really quite idiosyncratic, that actually Denman doesn't follow all the rules, and he creates this emphasis on the outer bays and these very pronounced windows, which are rather elegant. They're slightly bayed, and they in fact correspond to the staircases. And you see it fits nicely in with this strange collection of buildings that includes Clayton and Black's King and Queen pub. And that's a contemporary rendering of the publicity from the society. It's interesting that this careful drawing by Denman omits the downpipes, because the downpipes in very many of his buildings, he makes a feature of them, and they often carry the dates. So we see here these elaborate downpipes. And the three arches, which you can see on the ground floor, were decorated with these voussoirs, 3 voussoirs per arch, which are carved by Cribb. And here we see the first arch, and I just picked out the 3 voussoirs. And the one in the center of the first arch is in fact a portrait of the architect, John-Leopold Denman. And the other voussoirs are portraits of all the men who were working on the building. You see all of the different trades represented. Miraculously, these survive in very good condition. They're partly protected, being recessed, but this building is now being converted into a restaurant, and one shudders to think what will happen and whether in fact they will in the end continue. I think they are a remarkable and unique bit of public art, and they should be given extra special protection. And this, a few years later, in a similar vein, the offices for Brighton Herald, Brighton and Hove Herald, Pavilion buildings, that's a contemporary photograph. And then we see how it looked until very recently. It was rented by a cafe called All Bar One, and they were allowed by the planners to cover the facade with flower pots and cameras and loudspeakers and wiring and so on, in spite of the fact that this is an incredible bit again, public art by Joseph Cribb. Sorry, these just show, this drawing shows the facade, and the plans, I've put them up. I know you can't really see them properly. The right-hand bottom plan is the ground floor, and the left plan is the basement. But it shows the extent of the print works and all of the offices that were part of the building at the back. And this is quite an astonishing drawing to find at this time, an exploded axonometric that shows the relationship of the front office to the print works. And this is the facade as it was besmirched by all bar one, and the Cribb carvings were treated very badly. All bar one, thank goodness, has gone, but the building is now empty, and they've covered it in metal sheeting. I hope it's not been screwed in. It's clear that the owners don't care for the building, but who, one wonders, are the owners? Well, actually, it belongs to the council. So, you know, why doesn't the council protect a building, a heritage asset of this quality? And here, 1934, an eccentric building. This is the Sussex Eye Hospital, and you can see from the plan that towards the south there was a courtyard. It's sadly been filled in, but the arms were opened up to bring in the light, but also to give an excuse to concave the front facade. And this gives the building a lot more interest on the street, though it's now not been well looked after and is overshadowed by the hospital. But one of the surgeons who works there delights in telling his patients that, of course, the building was planned to resemble a pair of spectacles. And when we look, this is actually the case. The staircases, the round staircase towers are the hinges, and here's the nose piece. So this is, again, I think, another of John-Leopold's witticisms. There's the facade as it undulates concavely towards the center, and that's part of the rear. And then inside, Denman was a master at staircases, and his staircases, quite a number of his staircases are quite modern. So this is one of the pair of staircases in the hospital. We now come to a very strange and remarkable project. This is Eridge Castle, as it was once called, or Eridge Park. This is owned by the Aberfennys, otherwise known as the Nevilles, who owned large swathes of Sussex and maintained Eridge as a hunting park until the early 19th century, when they built this rather horrendous bit of crenellation, Disneyland, and then in the 1830s, they further crenellated it, as you can see in the picture below. And in 1936, the building was starting to fall apart, and it was in need of repair, and they sought the advice of John-Leopold Denman. And he advised them to demolish it, and thus gained for himself the commission to design one of the very last large country houses to be built in this country. And the top aerial shows the extent of the building today, with the much older stable blocks and farm buildings. And that shows an ordnance survey map of the full extent of Denman's building that was completed in 1938. And the perspective drawing is one of Denman's, and it shows the completed building, which was almost entirely new along its south front, and only parts, the very oldest parts of the other building were kept on the north side. And then the strange story continues. After the war, the Aberfennys discovered that they could no longer afford to run such a large house. And they brought Denman back and asked him to chop it down to less than half its size. And in the Regency townhouse, there are these remarkable drawings, which are prints of the original drawings from 1937. And this is where Denman is starting to sketch around as to how he's going to demolish part of the building that he's only 8 or 9 years earlier built. We can see that the house was very large, that it already had a more domestic end towards the west, and there was a minor door there. But the main entrance was to the north from a courtyard. And you have this series down the east front of large reception rooms and a dining room, huge kitchen, and then a central light well with a staircase. And what we see in the bottom drawing is Denman chopping out all that is shaded black on the upper drawing to create this much more cozy sort of council house sized dwelling. Well, it's actually still about 20 council houses, but it's there it is. So that very few architects, I think, have ever been called upon to design such a big building and then chop it in two. And these are photographs taken after surgery was carried out. And these are from Country Life. And they show the west entrance, which became the main front door. I should go back and point out, this is the part which was retained. And there is this main axial corridor, staircase, and sitting room. And here we see that western became the main front door. And here's the south front in this very polite Georgian style that John-Leopold adopted. And here again, another Denman joke. The swimming pool was set out by him as an exact replica of the plan of the demolished house, the wing of the house that was demolished. Unfortunately, the Abbey of Ennis, in their wisdom, will not allow us to take photographs, and so I must rely on the pictures. In Country Life, there's the main corridor and the sitting room with the staircase, and then at the top of the circular staircase, the landing and the library by Denman. And these are some photographs of the building today, the south front, the west entrance, and the garden room. And here, two delightful workers' cottages on the estate, done in this arts and crafts style with very subdued, as you can see, Georgian elements. And here, strangely built during the war from 1940, Denman was commissioned to build the Downs Crematorium in Bear Road. And the building is nestled into the slightly concave hillside, the main chapel at the center, and beyond it, the ovens and the flues. And then there is a subsidiary chapel. And then he creates these wings of walls for remembrance tablets. And suddenly, as we fly over, passing Angel, we see that in fact the building is in the form of an angel. We see it here clearly on the drawing. Here's the angel with his feet and his halo and his wings outstretched. So I think this is another rather macabre joke from John-Leopold. And it's quite an elegant building. When we think that it was built in wartime, a time of austerity, it's all of brick detailing. And it shows some affinity to St. Wilfrid's in Elm Grove, which was done by his friend Goodhart Rendell. These are just views of it from the different sides. And then around it are these gardens of remembrance and these tessellated walls. The walls are tessellated to create as much length of wall as possible so they can fit as many tablets on as possible. And then this just rather typical Denman detailing with this rub brick arch and so on. And the interiors all done with great attention to detail using Austrian oak, and still in in very good condition, apart from perhaps those rather unfortunate loudspeakers above the door. The coloured glass by Jeanette. And here is Barclays Bank, which many of you will recognise from 1957-59, a slightly idiosyncratic bit of neoclassicism, but again, very muscular. It gives rather a good impression on North Street. It's certainly the most likable of all the buildings down that side of the road, as you can see. But what many people will not know, but you can see it from the drawing, if you look at the section, you see that actually it isn't the solid mass that you see on the street, because inside there is a light well that cuts down, so that the offices are actually quite thin and they're full of light. But also the purpose was to create an opening so that light could fill the bank hall below. And the facade is actually organized to tell you that. This recession on the facade is an indication of the fact that behind there somewhere is the light well. Now I'd like to move on to pubs. Between 1881 and 1965, the Denmans designed over 65 pubs. Many of those built between the wars were for the Kemp Town Brewery and carried the logo KTB, and about 40 of them are still in use. 3 of them have been converted to supermarkets. This is one Railway Inn, Boundary Road, Hove, 1900, by Samuel. I think quite a charming building. It's changed color since I took this photograph. And here are 3 more Samuel pubs. The Ancient Marriott, a really nice sort of slightly Queen Anne detailing, but is surrounded by the most horrendous B&Q, IQ, DIY seating. How the planners ever allowed that to happen, I just do not know. But here we have another, the Eclipse. Both of these are in Hove. And the Eclipse is now called the Poet's Corner, and it's in really very good condition. And here's the Hollingbury Inn in Rodale Road. Here's one of my favorites, the Old House at Hove, Worthing, 1925, John-Leopold. And it's in this very quiet arts and crafts style. But look at the nice games of symmetry and asymmetry. The 2-story element shows the pub proper with its 2 bars and its main symmetrically placed entrance with the flat above. And then added on is a single-story element which contains a public assembly room. You see that here on the bottom right, and the windows. Of course, many of these pubs survive, but few of the interiors survive in anything like their original condition. This is another pub I enjoy looking at, Duke of Wellington in Shoreham, 1927. I have yet to be able to photograph it without cars parked in front of it. It's always got cars in front of it. There's a rather lovely drawing by Denman showing all the detail. The coloured glass is by Jeanette. I think, but I can't be sure, that the reliefs were designed by Charles Knight, the artist who was a pupil of Jeanette and was another of the Ditchling artists. And it has this rather nice neo-Tudor but slightly modern feel to it, and immaculate detailing. And here is this quite astonishing pub, Tally Ho in Eastbourne, which, when we look at it in detail, has an astonishing attention to detailing. There again is the 2-story element with the bars at the main piano nobile and apartments above, and then the single-story element which contains the function room. But the detailing and the craftsmanship is quite astonishing. For instance, the bay windows, they project and are supported by this rubber brick and tile fanning. And you can see Camptown Brewery and the windows, many of which have coloured glass by Jeanette. And again, I think these reliefs, they show huntsmen. I think these were in all likelihood designed by Charles Knight. And this shows the interiors, typical of these pubs by Denman, these highly decorated beams on the inside, and the various bars. And these are this is the coloured glass by Jeanette, and the bow window of the function room, and some of his glass in this paneling. And here's a pub you all know, the Freemasons, which was an existing pub remodeled for Camptown Breweries by John-Leopold. And you can see here on the street frontage, he creates this proscenium arch, and it's decorated with this beautiful pattern of mosaic, and there's a sort of hint of Gustav Klimt about it, the Vienna Secession, and we see the symbols of Freemasonry and the initials KTB. But I think it's a very, very elegant front. Sadly, very little of the interior survives. It's a pub you will go past. It's a corner pub, the Richmond, on the level, and it could be argued that it probably doesn't sit very comfortably in what was a predominantly Regency part of the level. But when you look closely, it does have exquisite brick detailing, which is well worth stopping to look at. And it has this very neat plan with the two bars, the central servery and the off license in the middle. And again, two typical details here, the exaggerated downpipe with the date on it and the small arch for the rainwater to pass through. And the breweries between the wars wanted pubs which would be suitable for whole families. They wanted to encourage family drinking. And this is a typically complex pub layout by Denman, the Green Jacket in Shoreham. And it shows that there are 3 bars, private bar, public bar, and the saloon bar. And they're all served by one connected servery. Then there is an off license to one side, but there's a children's room. There are toilets both sides for men and for women. And there is access to a rear garden, a beer garden at the back. These are 6 of those pubs built around Brighton: the Neville, the Milo-Kin, Whitehawk, which is now a community centre, the Romans in Southwick, George V Worthing, and the Grenadier in Hangleton. And these are 3 pubs which are now supermarkets. And it's, in a way, perhaps good that buildings do survive and given different functions. The Green Jacket looks pretty good still. Though, in fact, sadly, the supermarkets inside are very, very dreary and claustrophobic places because they've been designed without any inspiration at all. And of course, quite a few of the pubs have gone. This is one that's gone in the last year. This is the Bourne Inn in Eastbourne, which I've found quite elegant. And it was closed, but I did manage to photograph the interiors through the windows, and much of the interior was still intact, but it was threatened with demolition, and now it's gone. In fact, the building was retained and converted into flats, and I suppose they have a certain elegance, but the interiors have gone. So now I'll pass on finally to the churches, and the Denmans built a total of 12 churches de novo and carried out repairs or alterations to a further 60. And I chose to start this with this drawing, which again illustrates the quality of Denman's draftsmanship. But whether this is by John-Leopold or John-Bluett, I can't say. But this was a design for a church in Saltdean, which was never built, but it has a certain elegance to it. we can be sad that it wasn't completed. But I'd like to start. They were involved with remodeling and adding things to repairing many churches. St. Margaret Buxton was Samuel Denman's local because he lived in Buxton for quite a number of years. And he and his wife were very fond of this church. And they created a font cover, which you can see here. He and his wife paid for this font cover. And I think this carving was, excuse me, I've just had a, Ursula, please just tell them to go away. Sorry. The font cover was designed by Samuel Denman, but probably carved by Cribb. And it's on a beautiful counterweight system, so you can lift it with your little fingers. And then Samuel Denman and his wife paid for a new vestry screen, and that's the carved, giving the details of the donors. And Denman built the war memorial, which you can see in the bottom right. But this is Samuel Denman's grave, and it's a very beautiful sarcophagus, carved by Cribb with the pelican motif. The pelican motif is used because the pelican was a symbol of family loyalty. The pelican would peck its breast to feed its children with its blood. And Cribb, it was one of his favorite motifs. It's a very beautiful grave, which is not now in the best of condition. But this is a new church designed by Denman, a handsome memorial church in Hangleton, in this slightly stripped modern manner, again with the carvings of Joseph Cribb. Here again, the pelican, the St. Christopher. And we have to remember this is just before the war, when building materials were also in short supply. So there's a certain austerity to it. The left-hand end was designed by John-Bluett. This was the later edition of the church hall. And the interior I really like. The Denman has cantilevered the clerestory so that the side aisle, there are no columns to it, so you have a completely untrammeled space. He's not responsible for the color scheme. Try to imagine it as white and you'll like it a lot more. And then he was responsible for the furnishings, which are immaculate. And this is a church which the Denmans extended. This is St. Simon, St. June in East Dean. And here the congregation asked Denman to extend the church westwards by 20 or 30 feet. And he did this, lowering the height to make it clear that this was something new, but at the same time building it very much in the spirit of the old church. But when we look at his perpendicular, his details, they have this unique signature, slightly quirkiness to it, which I find very attractive. And at the end is half octagon, which is a baptistry, you'll see inside. Inside, the right-hand picture at the top is looking towards the baptistry and the font. The other side, we see the picture toward the altar and the older part of the church. And he marks, well, in a way, it's partly to disguise the transfer, but also in a way to mark it. He creates this astonishing organ bridge across the nave. And there's the detailing of the organ bridge. And here, and it's very sad, you go to this church and the baptistry is used as a chair stool. In order to take this photograph, I had to remove all of the chairs. And this wonderful font which, as far as I understand, was based on a fragment of a font which was found. And I assume, but I don't know for sure, that I have to do more research on Cribb's contributions, but I'm assuming that this was also done by Cribb. Next church is St. Michael Angels, Southwick, and this had this astonishing history. The main church, the nave, was very much a Victorian rebuild, but the tower had been retained. However, there was a German bomb that landed next to it, but didn't explode. It buried itself in the ground. The bomb brought in to supervise that. Oh dear. Can you hear me all right? My internet's playing up, I think. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I just had to mute somebody, but I think I can hear you fine again now.
Okay, thank you. So, so Denman was brought in to rebuild the tower, and he created a booklet. These are the drawings that he created for this. This is his survey of the tower, which was very badly damaged, and it was dismantled stone by stone. This is his drawing of his proposed structure of the roof, and this wonderful drawing on the right shows the piling going 30 or 40 feet into the ground. And he adds these two vestries on either side of the tower, partly to give it the stability that it needed. And then strangely, you will see on the left-hand picture, there was no doorway at the west end of the church. And Denman adds a new doorway. Presumably this was at the request of the vicar and the congregation. And here we see it today, this very important tower in the townscape. Here, the tower with these two vestries sticking out like ears on either side, but really quite elegant. And the arch, the doorway, which is in this very decorated Romanesque or Norman style, which was based on details in St. Mary de Hora in Shoreham. And it's very interesting that there is a booklet about the church, and the booklet about the church tells you everything about it, including the name of the man who made the hinges for the doors. But it makes no mention of the architect John-Leopold Denman, I think fairly typically. This is the Eridge Green Church near to the Aberfenny's home. It was a Victorian church. It only consisted of that squat nave and the tower and the entrance. And after the Second World War, Denman was commissioned to extend it with the new chancel, a special chapel at the other end for the Aberfenny's, and then on the west side, a baptistry and a vestry. So he remodeled the church, but in the language of the original. And then he totally changed the interior and created, I think, a very light, elegant interior. All of the fittings, all of the furnishings are done by him in oak. And we have the carved doorway to the Neville's little enclave, which I think would have been done again, designed perhaps by Charles Knight. And another font by Cribb. And this very, very nice blue ceiling. And the side windows are by Jeanette. And the lectern is designed by Leopold, John-Leopold. And here's a church in Brighton, St. Cuthman's Whitehawk. There was a church, a fairly new church from the early 30s, which was destroyed by a German bomb, and only a part of the crypt was kept, or could be kept. And Denman built this church on top of that, again using brick, the only affordable material at the time. And the main entrance is at the upper level from the road. And then there is this belfry with a secondary entrance halfway between the level of the church and the crypt. And that gave Denman the excuse to create this wonderful staircase, which descends down from the entrance into the crypt. but also curves upwards in two curves above. And this is one of a number of these very clever geometric staircases that he built. And it's now the Alpha Church or something or other, but some of the details remain. The crypt again is, sorry, not the crypt, the baptistry is again used as a store. I had to remove bags of rubbish in order to take this photograph of another crib font, very beautiful. This is the Church of St. George the Martyr in Shirley, a post-war church, again built with great economy of brick, but with a lot of inventiveness in the brick detailing, and a slightly later addition of a chapel and at the West End and various offices. It's got a slightly somber exterior because of the darkening of the brick, but the interior is full of light. And we have this quite strange but inventive altar where there is this blank wall with a crucifix, and the light comes from a hidden clerestory that you can see in that right-hand picture. And behind the altar is a balcony that goes around, and the organ is behind the crucifix, and the choirs sat on, still do sit on the balcony, so that you have the light and the music coming from above in quite an ethereal way. And here's another lovely font. And here's a very simple church, St. Mary Magdalene in Boldine, which is built from a barn, and it has some characteristic flint and stone detailing by Denman. And what is its most remarkable feature is the reredos, which is by Ninian Comber. And this had been in St. Anne's in Eastbourne. Ninian Comber had been one of Denman's teachers in London, and Denman saved this when the church was demolished and had it moved to St. Mary Magdalene. And it's a very charming little church, just tucked in below the dual carriageway. And there's yet another of these nice fonts. And here's a church, this is St. Luke's in Chington, which was built really, it's for a new housing estate, and it's not really built as a church at all. It's built as a community hall, and the altar is behind a sliding screen, and there is an organ above, again, hidden from view. And this gave Denman the excuse to create a tower, which is the staircase for the organist up to the upper level. And this is finished, this is cobblestone, a typical hexagonal window detail by Denman. And here, quite an extensive project. This is St. Peter's, West Blachington. This was this right-hand end was a downland church which had fallen completely into ruin. It had no roof and was saved by Summers Clark in the 1870s. And he added the shingle tower. But then after the Second World War, Denman was brought in to more than double the size of the church by adding this new nave, and again, one of his towers for the organist, and these curving vestries at the West End. I like this church, and I've given you a whole panorama of photographs from the road, the flat elevations from the road, the new and the old, a picture of the windmill, and these step back windows that create light on the altar. The north elevation is typical detailing of stone with tile and rubbed brick. And then that view we saw before, and the West End with the doorway. And this is the interior, which is all white. And we see on the right there, the old nave, and then on the left, the new nave. This plan doesn't come out very well, but you can see the old church, the new church, and Denman has knocked out the walls between the arches so that the two connect. And then he creates a very strange clerestory. You can see it just in the section, the clerestory window, which allows light in to both chapels. So the light comes in through these clerestories. Sorry. I've gone back. I've lost it. There we are. And you can see the light comes in through these clerestories in both directions, into the old chapel and into the new. And I think it's quite a charming interior. It's well looked after. Finally, the last church I'm going to show you is St. Peter's in Brighton, and the two Denmans, John-Leopold and John-Bluett, were brought in to remodel what I call the Somers Clark end, which is the north end, or what they call the liturgical east end, because that's where the altar is located. And sorry, this is looking southwards. The altar is behind us in this picture, and that's the altar end. And the Denmans created this really quite wonderful ceiling, and also added a new organ with the organ casing. So they're just a few of the church interventions of the Denmans. And then John-Leopold, at the very end of his life, in 1967, when he was already in his 80s, he was 85 years old by this time, and he published this charming, wonderful book of a survey of the structural development of Sussex churches. And it's full with his drawings and drawings of some of his friends. This is the church in New Haven. This is a schematic study of how the piers are made in Chichester Cathedral. That's St. Mary de Hora. This is an explanatory drawing of all sorts of bits of Chichester Cathedral. And then finally, a drawing by Charles Knight, his friend, pupil, in fact, at Brighton College of Art. And this is of Ditchling Church. And there we are. That's it. Thank you very much. That's the Denman Century part one. And I'd just like to say thank you to Derek Coles and Gilly Burton of the Regency Townhouse, who are also working on Denman, and who we share a lot, and they've been very helpful. Also, thanks to the RIBA Drawings Collection, which holds different collections of work by the Denmans, both in the Portland Place, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and in the Outstore at Fulham. And then finally to Joanna Denman and Johnny Barclay, who are respectively the daughter and stepson of John-Bluett Denman. So there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Brilliant presentation. Thank you.
David, that's fantastic. Such a massive body of work and so many iconic buildings and local landmarks. It's incredible. And also a huge amount of work for you to collate them. So thank you very much for doing that. I think we really do need to have a tour and certainly an exhibition of some of those beautiful drawings again. Does anybody have any questions, please? You're very welcome to turn your mics on and videos on if you'd like to and ask David a question. In the meantime, David, whilst people are having a think, I'm wondering if you could mention something about the protection of some of the buildings. Obviously, you kind of mentioned that some of them were not looked after and some of them were left unprotected. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what could be done about that.
Well, of course, some of the buildings are listed. It's interesting that what we call the Allied Irish Bank is grade 2 listed, but the All Bar One building next to the pavilion, which belongs to the council, is not listed, and they have not looked after it at all, which I think is very reprehensible. I think it would be good if more of the important, I mean, I'd be the last person to argue that all of these buildings should be preserved. I just think it would be important to select those that are worthy of some sort of special protection. Of course, the pubs, almost none of the pubs have interiors. The nearest is Tally Ho, and that now belongs to a young couple who have they run a steakhouse, and they would dearly like to be able to restore the interiors. But of course, that sort of restoration work is very expensive. But one hopes that the church work will be preserved. Though again, of course, churches, they get changed generation after generation, and so in many of these churches, Denman was just adding another chapter to the history. But it's very sad that very few of these churches give any recognition to Denman. You have these lovely produced church booklets, but they never mention the name of the architect, which is, I think, very sad. And I think that somehow the Denmans slipped between the cracks in a way, partly because of their period. They were very much overtaken by what you might call 20th century modernism. And I think they went out of fashion, which has been rather sad. I mean, Barclays Bank in Brighton is quite a remarkable building, but actually nothing, almost nothing apart from the staircases, it remains of the interiors. So there we are. I think it would be nice if there were just more interest, and then perhaps some of the buildings, their value would be appreciated.
Absolutely. Lots of praise coming in on the chat, so that's great. Lots of people also saying, Ian saying that he's walked past many of these buildings and not realised who they were by. I think a lot of us are in that category. So thank you very much.
Say that in the next talk, you mentioned before the number 1 bus, and the number 1 bus, I've plotted it. It actually goes past 24 Denman buildings. So if you travel from the Mile Oak pub to St. Cuthman's Church, you will pass 24 buildings by Denman.
Well, maybe we should all pile on to a number 1 sometime and see if we can fill it.
Perhaps we should have asked to have the number 1 bus named after the Denmans.
Alison, you've stolen my thunder. That was going to be my request in my second lecture, but you're absolutely right. I think they should be. There is an Anthony Dale bus, so why not have not just 1 but 3 buses? A Samuel bus, a John-Leopold bus, and a John-Bluett bus.
We'll give it a go. Kevin, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi David, thanks for the talk, really enjoyed it. In your trawls around the Denman estate, did you form an opinion of your favourite building and least favourite building?
Yeah, well, least favourite is sort of easier. Poor old Denman gets a lot of stick from Pevsner, and a lot of it is just not justified. But Samuel Denman's first church is the church at Plumpton Green, and it really is. It's a bit of a cabbage, actually. So that's my worst one. But I guess I really like the Tally Ho pub. I think it's pretty good. But also, I think that the chapel of Rickmansworth, which we'll see next week, is actually quite sublime. So there we go.
Thanks. Looking forward to next week's.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, next week's talk, David, is more domestic and building slightly further afield. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And I should mention that I did have the Plumpton Green Church in the presentation, and my dear wife Ursula said that as I had nothing nice to say about it, I should leave it out, so I left it out. Apologies to Plumpton Green.
Are there any more questions, please?
I just want to say thank you so much. That's really fascinating. Thank you.
Fantastic. Alison, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, you mentioned at the very end St Margaret's Church, Rottingdean. And what did he do there? Did you say what he did? I missed it.
Did I say Rottingdean?
Sorry, not Rottingdean, Ditchling, sorry.
Oh, I thought, yes, you got me mixed up. Ah,
sorry.
Well, yes. The church in Ditchling, of course, first of all, it's there because it's in his book, and the drawing is by Charles Knight. But in fact, they did do a complete vestry screen, which was a a monument to Louis Jeanette, and that was carved by Joseph Cribb. So that's the main contribution. Oh, and there are several small Cribb additions as well, but he didn't do a great deal in the Ditchling Church.
Thank you.
My grandfather left Brighton because he had double pneumonia and wasn't expected to live. So Samuel sold their home in Brighton in Withdean. And so when he came back from the war, the home was gone, and his wife was living with the family, and so they had to move. But as you say, maybe there was another element to the story about why they moved, but that was part of it.
I'm going to show those, the knoll in Withdean and Oldways, the house they built in Hurstpere Point. I'll be showing that in the second lecture.
Yeah.
That voice, by the way, is Joanna Denman, who is the daughter of John-Bluett Denman. So I'm very flattered that she's turned up this evening. Thank you very much.
I'm thrilled to. Thank you so much. What I do say is that some other people have said there's so many buildings you've mentioned that I've passed by and thought, oh gosh, that looks like my family's style. And of course it is their style because they designed it.
Yeah.
So there's several buildings I've thought could be theirs, and you've confirmed it to me. But by the way, the one you've mentioned in New Haven, the church, is that up on the hill?
Yes.
Right, I'll have to go back and have a look.
He actually there, he designed the lich gate, which is really very interesting. But that's the only thing he did to the church in New Haven.
Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. If any more questions at all, if there's no more, we'll wrap up. Any more?
Just thank you very much, David.
Thanks hugely. That was fantastic.
Well, Rickmansworth next time.
Thank you very, very much.
Excellent.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you,
Okay, well,
David.
thank you,
That's a
everybody. Thank you for joining us.
marvelous job, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks from Helen too. Excellent.
Thank you, David.
Thank you,
What a
David.
wonderful record.